This conference will now be recorded.
Great. Yeah. Nice and warm. I just told you, they very much appreciate us being there. Okay. Being surprised. Yeah. I was watching them say they don't do that. Nobody else does it. You don't understand it, but very happy that we got some. Good.
Like 700.
I did. It was busy. Good for you, though. At least with you.
Meeting.
Well.
Hello. I'm going to be in charge of the meeting.
Is Anita coming back?
Why?
So that we
Just in
bang
case
it
we
for
have
if we need help.
Oh, I can unmute people. Gee,
Or use them.
mute them or unmute.
Start the pledge of allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I thank everybody for showing up. Just one thing, that this is a meeting for the village board members to talk. If we have time at the end, I'm happy to listen to whatever anyone has to say, but just so you know that we're not trying to avoid you, but one thing we will be having is a town hall meeting. If you aren't able to talk today and wanted to, probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Yep. Which will go as quick as it has to. And one thing we could probably find out is a poll from the people here, what time of the day is best for everybody. Obviously, this worked pretty good.
Seems like it.
Okay, one of the things we sent around was, I asked you all to take a look at the current vacation rental policy. I had gone through and picked out some of the things I thought we should talk about. Let's just take those and see what your thoughts are on that. One of them was a contact person now can be an hour away. We all know the problem with that is you've got a party going on next to you and you're told an hour before somebody's going to come and do anything.
Yeah, we talked about it, half an hour,
Yeah,
changing that to half an hour.
we talked.
I think we sort of had a consensus.
We did, all right. So,
Okay, and the other part of that too is if it is a party that's out of control, you can always call the police.
Yeah.
So, and once again, whatever we do here is not something that'll be reviewed yearly. So now half hour doesn't work out. I think it's a step in the right direction. The other one I had on here was weddings, corporate events, and commercial functions. As you know, I've always stated, I just don't think someone running a house in the neighborhood should have any of those rights. It didn't get passed that way in our first go around 2.5 years ago. What's anyone's opinion on that?
Why then? Because we were told by the attorneys that we can't treat the vacation rental. You know, we also have to tell all the locals they can't have a wedding or whatever.
I don't remember that.
Maybe, I mean, maybe
Let's
it can
look
be
into
by,
that.
maybe we can.
Yeah, run it by Jana.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's assume that we can. Does anyone have an opinion on that one way or the other?
I don't think we should allow vacation rentals to have weddings, but,
Yeah, I mean, where are you going to park, for number
yeah,
one?
exactly.
Airbnb's
I think-
policy,
I'm pretty sure that's why it goes in as well.
Airbnb's policy is that you don't have parties and weddings, like it says right in there. When somebody.
Oh,
goes to sign-
Airbnb, right.
Yeah, exactly.
so that contract between the new renter and Airbnb is separate
Right.
from what our regulations, okay.
I don't know what VRBO is, maybe it's something similar.
Hey, Jackie, somebody texted us and said they can't hear what's going on at the meeting.
They can't hear.
On the Zoom, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
We have our mic
All right,
on.
hand me that box, please.
Where's Janita when you need her?
I know, right?
Okay, so at this point then, just straw vote, if we can do it, we're all in agreement, we'll change that in the village. I don't think the town has any will.
There it goes. So now we can see it's registering our voice.
Can any of you hear us now?
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, I did do that. I hit the wrong button. I did that.
Okay, to answer your question, Artie, if we're allowed to. To limit the number of people, what they're allowed to sleep.
So we all know that every question we have, if we can, and if
I
we
think
can
that's going to be
enforce
like
it.
the other one.
But if we find out we can't, then it just forms all our opinion. So just kind of a straw vote from everybody. When we say limit, what are we talking about? I mean, obviously, if someone's picking someone up to go play golf, that's not the end of the world.
The people that are staying there now, that are sleeping there.
So you're saying limited to just the people that are there?
Yeah.
Use the motel model. You wouldn't expect to rent a motel room, bring in 20 people to come visit you.
Yeah, which rarely happens.
Okay, well, all right, so we'll find out on that.
Oh, yeah, 3 years.
So basically, the answer is no guests. Check on that, okay. Outdoor fires.
And then when you're done.
Hey, people are moving out. I mean, most of the problems that are happening outside and, obnoxious behavior. Maybe we should restrict
Yeah.
fire pits. I know.
Half of them have them already.
And like I said, it doesn't all have to be done this year. I mean, we can give people a chance.
I'm just not aware of it being an issue. I don't care.
Well, you know something, you don't hear of it being an issue, but you do hear of loud noises. Why are people outside? Are they, right.
Maybe a good direction to go on that, since we're not really getting a consensus, is when we have our town hall meeting,
Get people's
get
feedback.
people's feedback.
Okay.
What do you think?
Sure.
Because during the day you could say barbecue grills because everyone's hovering around the grill and drinking beers and having a good time. You know what I mean?
We're trying to show all of that.
And the other one I looked at was permit must be displayed online and in retail, in rental property. Does anyone know right now, can you go online and look up a property? Is it public knowledge?
Who go online?
Let's say you want to know across the street if it's a vacation rental, who it is, how many people they're allowed to have. Is that public knowledge? Go do it.
I don't know if it's easily accessible. I'm sure it's online somewhere.
The fire department has that information.
But can the general public have it?
I mean, should they be able to go to our website to see if their next door neighbor is a vacation rental? Or has a valid permit? Or doesn't have a valid
Their
permit?
neighbors are.
Is there any,
Well-
well, but then by the same token, what does their permit say? How many people can they have? It might say they can only have 4, which is 2 cars. All of a sudden they've got 7. I mean, those are the kind of things people could look up. Is there any reason?
Yeah, it can be part of the new website.
Is there any reason we wouldn't want people to know the information about the STRs that are near them?
No, and I mean,
Public knowledge,
all we need is the map, don't we? I mean,
And the map doesn't tell you how many people.
Well, right.
no, it doesn't. It
But you should
doesn't.
be able to look at the permit. I mean, there's nothing private in there.
Maybe in the permit, within, when you click on the sort of the map that has permit information.
Again, that might be a question for Janet as to,
Sure.
it's a legal document or isn't it a legal document?
Is it foilable? If it is, then it's public information. We can ask that.
Anyway, I think it should be in the website. We're allowed,
Yeah, put the map on the website.
and, yeah. Good idea.
I put down in here, and I'm trying to remember why, regulations pertaining to homeowners associations. There's any,
Oh, because in the last page 13 at the bottom, there was an active HOA. The active HOA took precedent over,
oh yeah, basically I think all it said, like she says, it's the bottom of page 13C, under 11.6 miscellaneous. And it mentions that the only real regulations that apply to this are fire and safety and any code enforcements, but nothing else pertains to
anybody in an
HOAs.
HOA.
Are we okay with that? Like I said, I just went through here and tried to pick out anything I thought that was a point worth discussing.
Yeah, I'm fine leaving the.
Yeah, we're allowing the HOAs to regulate everything else about it.
If we end up going that way. So what you're saying is if we go that way.
Today, in today's law.
So kind of a, for instance, is take a place, we'll just pick Pine Hill. If they say it's fine to have fire pits, they say it's fine to have cars all over the road, it's their HOA.
And yeah, and they would be responsible for regulating that.
Right, okay. And if you don't like it, then you get to be part of the HOA and you change it, I guess. Okay.
So if someone, but they're still under the, what we thought was the cap, correct? The HOAs are still part of, in theory, the collective cap, I know that was impacted there. And then if someone connects with the complaint hotline, and it's multiple times, do we allow, so we have code enforcement come in, assess it, and then assess a fine, or are we just all hands off, let the HOA settle that? So I feel like there should be, the municipality should have an avenue to address it, but primarily it should be the HOA.
Primarily, it should be unless, I mean, who's it affecting but just another person in the HOA?
Sure, and then they have an avenue, say if the recourse at the HOA isn't.
I wouldn't you want the homeowners association to be active enough in
In
regulating?
theory, yeah, I would, of course.
Right,
However, if they give someone who's living next to one any sort of, the same opportunity as someone outside the HOA.
And while we're on the topic of HOAs, we did learn that the Beach Hill does not have an HOA. They have a small HOA that takes care of the lakefront property.
So that's not, that HOA doesn't meet the threshold.
It's not an HOA for everyone there, it's only an HOA for the people that bought into having the beachfront when they bought that. So just to throw it out for what it's worth.
So their rules of South Lake, South Lake is, as far as zone,
Put it into protected neighborhood.
change it to village residential.
That'd be where I would look at it, but it's up to what you guys think. Once again, I mean, when we get to our town hall, we get to our public hearings, we can hear the other side of it. Nothing's been set in stone. We've taken Dean Dietrich's group's recommendations, we have to make ours, and then we have to listen to the public, and then we get the great decision. Do you want to say something or not say something?
I'm thinking.
Okay, that's good. Okay, well, to say, we'll come back to all of this, just. Ready?
No, I'm not ready.
Okay. Okay, going back to the top of the list, the HOA, the rate ends the end of September. Is it the town's decision they're going to extend 3 months with the option that if you don't need that much, you can always rescind it?
That's what I understand.
Jason would probably know better because of the meeting this morning.
I assume we'd like to mirror that. Like I said, I would hate for us to go through public hearings, make a law, and then need another month and another month. Let's just go with 3. If we don't need the time, we can always rescind it.
Sure.
Mike says there's no audio.
Still?
Mike says there's no audio.
Everybody else can hear it.
Yeah, we just, we fixed it, it was kind of 5 minutes ago.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
They should put on here extended date to legal counsel's advice, because I think the whole thing came down to, yes, we might have recommendations, we might have decisions, but then we've got to have the filing and the open meetings to make it a law, pick that time for that. So yes, 3 months still works.
We can always make it shorter if we have a lot.
And then the other question became, should moratorium extend to all districts? I assume that question was directed at the Main Street corridor. Do we want to open that back up, take that out of the current moratorium, or do we want to leave it there?
If we are making 0 changes to the corridor, isn't that so far?
Right.
We're making 0 changes, then why have that part of the moratorium?
The only thing that wouldn't be, though, is not being able to rent first floor residentially at street level.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, people could apply in the meantime. That's, I guess, the only thing I can think of.
But we also have the permit cap that was agreed that it was holistically, so that might interfere if they can get a permit and someone else might not. Like say village residential, the way this board has set it up is that if you come out of the moratorium, you're on and if there aren't any additional ones, you have to go onto a wait list. So that wouldn't seem, they use the word fair, but it would give an advantage to those in the gateway corridor.
Did we really discuss caps?
That
I
was
mean,
there.
fundamentally, we did.
So since village residential cannot have any new ones.
They can have
They have
posters,
posted.
but it'd be it would be in the cap. So we said 240 was the upper end.
We talked about it.
We talked about it, but did we agree on anything?
The more, like, the whole cap thing is really, what are we capping? We're capping.
Well, we'd only be capping people that want to be on the Main Street corridor, because you can't go into the residential neighborhoods. although depending on what happens with planned development and homeowners
Well,
association.
wouldn't we be capping hosted as well?
Yes.
Yes. Hosted, we would leave hosted in the village and town residential. We would want to cap that, right?
I was under the impression we were going to cap everything, hosted and unhosted. I
Yes.
could be,
No, you're right.
In the thought of throwing something stupid out, which probably isn't legal, is it possible, I wonder, to have a cap on people that are in village residential that are hosted and have a certain cap and have a separate one for the main street? And I'm assuming the whole idea behind a cap is so that you don't all of a sudden have a runaway of a lot of people and find you made a mistake.
The condos were also part of that.
Like I say, it's just throwing out dumb thoughts for your thoughts to see if I.
Good answer.
it's more surgical, but it's more
Well,
complicated.
what's the idea behind the cap?
It just gives a
So then
base, it gives a, to limit and to give the,
And then
it's
you-
probably a baseline of like, is this too much, too not, what areas are working, what not.
Do we all
And then
think it's too much the
to-
way it is now?
Well, what I guess the answer is that,
I think it's too much in village residential, non-hosted. But
Right,
I
there-
don't think it's too much everywhere else. That's just my opinion.
And that's my opinion too. I think the market's gonna dictate.
we're back, you're talking about Main Street corridor,
Yeah.
Village Center, yeah, okay.
Because it's not like you don't push a magic button and all of a sudden you have a successful short-term rental. Like, you have to no, you don't. You have to curate things and make yourself unique.
Sure.
And, yeah, I think the market's gonna dictate it.
But-
Like Pine Hill, like if that all went to STRs, like only a certain few people want to stay in like a condominium development or a townhouse development. There's people who want to stay in the lake, there's people who want to stay in the woods. I think the market's gonna dictate a lot of that.
I'll just circle back to what Art was saying.
So what do you think?
He keeps coming back, like, do we want to make sure we eliminate
I don't know
all
the right
long
answer
term on
either.
Main Street, all long term on Gateway Corridor? And if we have that cap, then there's an opportunity to preserve some of that because the cap. But if we're
Well,
not,
but what are you gonna do if you have a cap, we'll say of 10 more, and then 10 more people come? I guess you have a chance to stop and
we're
think.
going to reevaluate it in a year. That was the comments, and I guess that's in the town too. This is an ongoing process. Unlike before, where, there's a lawsuit and the development, they were developing the law, but at the same time, now that it's active, minus any lawsuits, the boards can come back to their individual laws and see if it's working in an ongoing process.
So that's right, when the moratorium ends, that day, a bunch of people are gonna apply for permits that don't even want permits.
You're talking about on Main Street?
No, everywhere. I mean,
Just like a just in case thing.
Just in case, all the
Oh, I
condos.
see what you're saying. If we
And
allow,
then use up and take them away from somebody who's actually,
Emily's response to that, the town was that you must rent a minimum of 14 days, or I think it was more, maybe.
yeah, but you could say you're going to and take the permit.
What's
That's-
that?
that's
You could say you're going to and
back
take
to
the permit.
enforcement.
And then those 10, 15 extra ones are
Oh,
gone
I hear you.
immediately.
I hear you.
We've gone back and forth on this, but
Sure.
let's carve out Main Street and Village Center. Do we want to do what Mark said and let the buyer or the market dictate what goes on there and just leave it alone?
You're talking,
Just Main Street,
regarding,
just Main Street.
I think it's all, the whole.
Just lines here or the corridor?
Well, it's the corridor.
And the corridor of Sentinel
Main
Road,
Street corridor and
86.
the entrance corridor, everything, yes. Do we want to just carve that out and leave it alone, knowing that's where we want growth to be, or do we want to put a cap on it?
I think we should leave it alone. It's my personal opinion.
I'm inclined to put a cap on it.
Also, it goes back to people, these are businesses.
I know,
And
but
if that's the business decision somebody wants to make, then you're gonna
you're
take that away
right,
from them.
but let's use
Yeah.
the Wanda as a perfect example. It's all
But you can
long-term.
only,
You can only have one.
No, in
Oh.
Village Center, you can have multiple and rent for $365.
But he could also become a hotel and do the same thing, right?
He could.
You wouldn't, I don't know why you want to, all the additional expenses of having to maintain it.
Need parking.
Not on Main Street. Right?
Probably not. The way,
It's a
Okay.
Thunderbird, right?
the Marcy doesn't.
but again, the market, like, people don't want to stay in the Wanda building, like for. a
People want
short-term rental.
affordable STRs. I mean, and if that's affordable, I mean,
I think, we're thinking, like, if we let something happen, all of a sudden, it's going to become a total STR, and I just don't think that's the market right now. I just don't.
No, I totally agree with you. It's just over time.
You want, people want, they want houses in residential areas, and we're stopping that. That's where people really want to be. They want to rent a house and have parties, and that's what they want to do on vacation. I know you know that.
I live next to.
And that's the best part of this new proposal is that's done. You know, the permits are going to carry on until the sale, hopefully, if we can make it work. But this other stuff we're talking about, like we're thinking these worst case scenarios, it's just.
Well, you gotta think worst case scenarios.
Expect the best.
But you know, this is not something we're not going to revisit again. Like if all of a sudden we blow up and got 100 more vacations, then yeah, obviously that's.
All right, so Della Val's building is for sale, right? It's empty right now, right? Nobody, I don't think there's anybody in, but it was long term. So there were 5 or 6 apartments. Okay, somebody may purchase that and turn that into STRs. And that's okay, we would lose 5 or 6 long-term rentals.
Well, the way it's situated in that building is that they're small and they're not, for the market, what Mark keeps talking about, they're not going to rent as is. They need to make 2, maybe 3 at the most out of that building. So, or else they're tiny.
I get that, but if we don't cap, we'll lose long-term rentals on Main Street.
Yeah. Sure.
So right now, on Main Street, you can have as many STRs as you want. Take Del Valle building,
Yes,
that's the law.
Yes, yes.
Do we want to change that law so you can only have a certain number?
Well, we
talked about that.
talked about that, and I think we all disagreed. And, you know, we all said, no, leave it the way it is.
Okay. Keep throwing ideas out.
So did we decide on the cap?
No.
Are we agreeing not to decide on the cap? Is that what's going on?
Well,
Because the conversation's dying up and we're moving on. I just want to,
Well,
at the same
I don't want to feel like I'm crazy.
Well, actually, we also discussed about not apply as we extend the moratorium, not extend the moratorium on Village Center and Gateway Corridor. Because that's where we want the STRs.
So there's two
There's 2
decisions to
on
make.
the table, yes, plus.
Should we just decide on it now?
We probably should, so that we don't.
Well, I think the key points are, as Peter said, or Mark, I can't remember which. Right now, as far as Main Street corridor and Gateway corridors, we're not changing anything.
So far.
Correct? I mean, so far. And then maybe that's a good point, until we've had public feedback and.
One thing is the street level,
Oh,
Except for
yes.
the street level.
but there's no plans in the works right now that are contrary to that.
Should if we come out of,
To coffee shop and,
But
No, they have retail.
The plan
Yeah,
for
they
the
do.
coffee shop is to have a store.
plan.
Yeah.
A lot of hotels went into town, plan not being a chain, and now chains, but things change. Like I say, there is always the meeting, we'll get a chance to hear what the public has to say.
So our proposal is no changes.
Yeah, we'll check on that, find out about the first level of Main
And
Street.
giving up the moratorium, not having the Gateway Corridor, not extending the moratorium.
just a little unclear then.
Okay, I'll find out the answers to those questions.
So we're just tabling the cap number and whether to
We're
include.
going to leave it for the public forum. Ask the public at the time.
Okay, from my perspective, it would, I think, be more clear, we had a recommendation, much like all the others, and then.
You have a recommendation?
Well, holistically cap with the number
Cap
that.
what? And what did the cap apply
Was it
to?
the higher end was 240, and it applies to absolutely every STR permit in
So,
the village.
permit.
I'm open to delineating the different zones and capping those, but that's going to take a little bit more work to identify identify again. Most of them, not even have to differentiate between the two, but like the number, so on and so forth.
Well, I do think like Peter said, if we all of a sudden put a cap that's 12 higher than what we are now, and a lot of people say, we better hurry up and get one in case we ever want to rent, that could use them all up.
But then again, that's just a tentative number, the 240 that you're going to present.
Right, I'm just saying
The public can say, that's way too many
That's right.
or not enough, but at least it's something for them concrete.
And that's the other side of it, exactly.
So are we not going to do that? Yes.
It's
I'm really pushing here. So I know.
I agree with Peter's, like, I think once the moratorium's over, I think a lot of people are gonna grab them, and the last thing I would hate to see is like somebody who wants to come buy a house in the neighborhood and they have to rent out their basement so
Sure,
that they
no,
can afford their mortgage, and they can't get a permit because we don't have enough of them.
Well, they can rent long-term.
So do we want?
You're absolutely right.
I guess that's up
With
to the
put
mayor.
a small dent into a $700,000 mortgage.
So that's up to the mayor. Do you not want
So we have 221 is the best answer we can get on how many permits we have. So you're recommending 247?
to? Oh, well, I was at 230, but then there's others that mentioned 240 and then just, at some point, there's a cap, a jumping off point for the public to interface with. I was like, oh, 240s.
I mean, if all this is a number to just throw a number out so we can then get public input, I'm fine with it.
But people might say we're crazy to try to have a cap.
Yeah, that's fine.
What's your pleasure?
Are you facilitating a straw poll?
Sure.
So I'm in favor of a cap.
And the number is?
240 is the high end.
So what, give me a number.
240. Because that's what we talked about, that number where, the number of 240 was contract.
Mark?
I still don't like the idea of a cap.
Yeah, only because the moratorium is going to go over. People who don't want to rent are going to.
Why do you think that? Why?
Because just in case, insurance
Just
costs.
in case what? Just in case the sky is falling?
Just like
What?
bucks that you cost for a permit or whatever it is.
Well, but why did so many people jump in when they heard there was a moratorium coming and doing the same thing? That's what Peter's saying. If we opened it up again, we could have them jump in. The town would be.
Did people, all right, people, when they heard the moratorium was coming, you're right, there was an influx. I think 10, I think there were 10 permits. Are they active? Are they valid permits now? We don't know that. To make a blanket assumption that people are, so you're looking at me saying, I'm gonna go get an STR permit just in case, right? What are you basing that on?
He's an entrepreneur, so I think that's the lens he sees.
In case somebody's on the fence.
You think there are that many people that
it's
are on
more-
the fence
I think
about
it's more-
turning their
I think
homes?
it's more condo situations than anything else.
But can we?
I disagree with that.
That's also the same speculation, thinking somebody's gonna buy cowbells and turn that into short-term rentals. You're just guessing.
So are we going with the 240?
But I think that is more credible than, Tom, Dick, and Harry going and buying an STR permit just in case.
Great friends,
Yes,
So it's 2 to 2.
I'm a cap, 240.
It's 2 to 2, so it's up to you. Yeah.
Since it's just a number that's going to be changed possibly in the future, I don't mind. Let's go with 240 just to have a number. Easy enough. Set a date to get public input.
As soon as possible.
Okay, as soon as possible.
Do we have anything still? Oh. So, unhosted, all right, unhosted in village and town residential. No more. You can.
No more new ones.
No more new ones, correct. What do we want to talk about? Expiration or sunsetting of unhosted in town and village residential?
That's a very involved Can I just pause that for it? Because we
Sure.
have to decide on whether it's going to extend to all the districts. Did we decide? Again, that's just up for
You
the
mean the
public.
240?
No, should the moratorium extend to all the districts? We decided on the cap number, but what it applies to. There's two that feel that the Gateway corridor or Main Street should not be
Well, then you have to subtract what's in there now.
All right, wait a minute, could
You have to
that could,
subtract what's in the gateway now.
No,
From the cap.
it's an agree, like, I guess it's, what do we want to agree on? Is it holistic, all of Lake Placid, or is it just zone by zone?
that might be a legal question. We don't know if we can be that,
Okay.
that broad, you're right.
I had that from OED.
Okay.
No concise answer before. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I apologize, Chairman.
But sorry,
Thought we'd already agreed on that there was gonna be no sunset. Just you wouldn't change ownership.
Is it?
I thought we
We
talked
did?
about that.
I didn't think we were all in agreement. Okay,
But because if we.
It's just change of
if it's
ownership.
3
No.
or 5 years, and then there's gonna be a flood of homes on the market.
yeah.
Again, I'm making that up, but maybe. Worst case scenario.
But they would still, I understand how the mayor suggested it, and there was some like, well, you want to do that, let them rent 365. But also, they still would be held to the same standards of just normally renting, and if they want to lose their permit before the 5 years is up, there's not going to be as much lawlessness or who cares, like Animal House type situation, because you can have your permit yanked before that 5 years is up. So it behooves you to run a very smooth and very orderly business before
We've
that.
never yanked, not one has been yanked yet.
Oh, I'm aware, but I'm just saying that would be with an increased compliance, the manpower for compliance, that would be one of those situations where it would be less gray, more, objective, standards based.
So it'd be if your permit is yanked, if you will, or when you change ownership, one or the other.
No, I was thinking it would be sunset clause. But I guess that would be the most baseline, simplest version of it. So I was just trying to create, there was a lot of concern when Art suggested an opportunity for an out, that it was going to be a free-for-all, but in my estimation, that with an enhanced compliance, you do have an opportunity for your permit to be pulled. So do you really want to utilize that 5 years to get your investment back? No. So it won't be as crazy as one participating or people participating. Just a thought.
Okay, I think we can come back to that conversation too. The last thing on the list that we had here was town of North Elm will meet with the town to review the changes compared to the village. Is that worthwhile? I mean, are we going to come down to,
I think it's worthwhile.
okay, sure. And at what point do we do that? After our town hall meeting?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
Because they just had theirs. And there were a couple items.
The town hall meeting?
Yes, this morning.
And how did that go?
Well, it was well attended, and many are here, full and double duty. So one of the delineation between hosted and unhosted, the removal of it in the town seemed to be an issue of contention. So that would be one aspect.
When you say the removal, they.
Meaning you
They
go back to
weren't gonna have a
hosted and
hosted.
unhosted, go back to hosted.
Oh, go back to those two? And it-
Something, because it wouldn't be fair, because if you are capping a certain district,
Yeah.
and it's like you're not delineating between hosted and unhosted, then you're just not able to.
So are you going to have 4 categories now?
That's
Hosted,
up to Emily, she's diving back into it.
hosted, unhosted, capped, and live.
Pull up the other one. And I can't honestly say, because that was just something that
Okay.
I think people pushed back on, and that, I think there was, am I correct on that? There was enough pushback to say, let's reevaluate that perspective.
It sounded like if I may, a delineation under the capped. So not necessarily like 2 types of capped. Was the
Yes.
direction they might have been thinking.
Because if in a cap district, you wouldn't have been able to do it, but now, if you have unhosted, you can, very similar to what the village might be.
And that brings us back to the question on if we can have different caps on different zones.
Mhm.
It would seem like you could, common sense does not always prevail. Okay. I was writing before when I think you guys brought up the last thing I wanted to bring up, but that was if we wanted to have a menu of ways people could have vacation rentals. And part of that was that 3 to 5 year, part of that was when it changed ownership. That's kind of like the conversation you guys were having while I was writing. Where did we end up on that? Do we
I
want
think it
to?
should be a change of ownership. My opinion. It's, I guess.
Yeah, I would go with change of ownership.
Are we looking then, instead of that way to get rid of the person who's what we call a professional listing, to do that by the 90 days? It won't be worth it for them to have it? Is that pretty much the way that those people will be going away? I mean, it makes sense to me that it would. I mean, be better off to buy a property in the town where you can rent 365 and get a better return on your investment.
Or somewhere, another zone.
Okay, well, like I said, and it's all for now, and we're going to hear hopefully a lot from our public. Anything you guys want to bring up?
Just think we're gonna have to have 2 public hearings for village and town. So we're going different routes. Can't see how we can have one public.
Well,
hearing.
I agree. I think we have our own, and we said what we want to do. They're doing the same thing, and then when we're all done, we'll see where we can have common ground. Or we don't.
It was very confusing. There was a gentleman who was videoing in. He was on Hillcrest. He was in a town meeting. I said that we would be meeting, contact Anita and come back at 3:30. That we're discussing it would be more pertinent to him. So having one public hearing discussing 2 laws that have,
It'd be too confusing.
it's very,
And I have seen people on this one who live in the town.
On the board, it's confusing where the village and town know how things work out. I don't blame anyone for being confused. Anything else?
you have permit must be displayed online in your rental property. Is that?
I've got that down to ask.
And that actually is part of the permit process. You're supposed to display your number on your listing of VRBO or Airbnb.
And then in the rental property, is that too invasive? I'm not sure if the.
You're supposed to post it in the rental too.
Yeah, you are.
You're supposed to permit
That's
that.
part of the
Right,
regulation.
so if it's there, so we don't want to change anything then?
Well,
To ensure that they do
I
post.
want
it.
to find out if it's legal to have, if it's public knowledge, and if it is, I think it should be on a place where you live across the street and you got a problem, you can look it up
Okay, so they're on
and
the website.
see what it says.
Okay.
But we might find out there's a law against it. I just can't see any information that's on there, or we redact, person's home address if that's not allowed, but the number of bedrooms, the number of people they're allowed to have, that should be part of the permit. Should be something you try find on
I mean, home address isn't on the, what's posted in the rental. It's a contact person, it's address for 911 purposes. What else?
But we'll find out the answer to that. Any other questions or any other comments? Are you ready for the public? Are you guys ready for us? Now, someone better ask a question tonight.
Well, don't forget we have,
That's okay.
let's go back.
Yep. Would anyone like to speak? I'd love to hear from you. Please. I think we've heard, are you
Is that
the
John?
John from Hillcrest?
Yes.
Yep.
Can't golf today, it was raining too much.
That me? Okay, so I'm an STR on Hillcrest. We don't post addresses on VRBO or Airbnb. I'd be concerned about that. I don't know people addresses until they commit. And if I had a criminal mind, I'll probably think about, it'd be a great way to identify houses that aren't occupied all the time. Go into them, check the calendar, go into them, ransack. Just something.
I think more what we were talking about, maybe, yes, some things have to be redacted, but people should be able to know that you have a vacation rental, so you're only allowed to say 6 people, 3 cars, and know that kind of information, and know that you did comply with your septic tank and things like that. I mean, those are all code enforcement things that have to be done. But like I say, that'll come out, I'm sure, with our lawyers.
I can see what he's saying, like to have that displayed publicly is probably not the best. It'd be like me, and if I had one across the street, I would come to the building office and ask about it. How many people can they have? 6? And you could get that information that way. But to have it out in the public, I can see that could be pretty dangerous.
Maybe that's a legal question too.
People have a pretty good idea, they see it. I mean, pick up flowers, they walk their dogs on the lawn when we're not there. And, so people do know.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Anybody else?
I have a
Please.
couple of questions. So when you say hosted, does that mean the host is living in the same house, or is it on the property? Because that's two different things.
Yeah, I think, correct me on this, Jackie's kind of our person that's been sitting on this floor, but let's say you had a house with a garage that had an apartment above it. I would say that would be hosted. The whole idea is that you're on the property, if they're having a party, they've got people in there, you can shut it down, you can go to quiet it down, someone can call you, so yeah. But
And
the
then-
idea is that the person would be on the property and be there while it was rented.
And then does the host have to be there?
Yes.
Okay. And then to me, the second point that, just from gathering all the information that you guys were talking about, the whole thing is not allowing businesses to operate in residential zones. I mean, that's the whole issue.
Of course, the other problem that comes into that is that the New York State does not recognize a vacation rental as a business. It's a residential.
When there are 15 cars parked at the reunion house.
I guess all I can
In
say
the
is talk to
Hillcrest
your
neighborhood.
governor, but right now, New York State does not recognize a vacation rental as a business.
But can
That's part of our frustration as well.
yeah.
Single family residence either way.
And then just the third thing, all these things, we need enforcement to,
We
I mean,
agree.
that's-
We couldn't agree more.
okay, so.
I mean, that's number one. I mean, it took us a while to come to that conclusion, but everything we're talking about, we don't have enforcement, then what are we even bothering?
Right,
So
exactly.
It is number one on our list.
Yeah.
And the other thing, just to throw it out there, if you guys want to write your state representatives, STR don't pay county or state sales tax. I mean, you're paying it on your house to contribute to the county and the state, and they're not. I'm not sure how that happens, but just to throw it out there.
Jackie, did you want to elaborate on what the potential plan is to help the enforcement?
No.
Oh, there's no potential plan.
Well,
Yeah, there is.
yeah, I mean, we do have a potential.
We're looking to move the fine from a criminal fine to a civil fine, because that's easier to enforce. I mean, that is definitely on the plan.
In addition to compliance monitor.
Right.
There's a compliance monitor that, many of you were here earlier. There's Brett, who is in the code enforcement office, will be doing some additional work to help organize the information and be part of the compliance monitor. And then the hope is to, in theory, to still some confidence in the public in compliance. And if that isn't enough, reevaluating and then add additional individuals to the code enforcement for compliance. And that would be funded by the raising of the permit fees, application fees, which we cannot charge any more than what we're expending, correct?
The 5% occupancy tax, can any of that be shifted around? Or is that set in stone? I know some goes to Roost and I don't know where the rest of it goes.
3% goes to Roost for advertising, that's how it was set up originally. The other 2% was set up to go into a benefit for the community fund, that's LEAF.
Right. The 3% for Roost seems high just because they promote quite a bit. But when does that get revisited, or that's not something that could go to road to?
It was from the state legislature back when the bed tax was first.
That's a contract with the
So
county
that's-
too. It's,
Which was back in 1996, 7, I think.
It's been a while.
So none of that could go to enforcement? No.
That's not, money's
Little bit
not a
goes to
problem.
the county treasurer to collect the money, but that's it.
If I could say, money for enforcement's not a problem. I mean, if we needed more enforcement, if we needed that, we'd double the cost of a permit because it's self-policing. So that's really where the money ought to come from. But the problem we run into with that is that the state doesn't like villages. The money cannot come to us. It has to go to the town. So we're dependent on them.
And it's a
I mean,
town
for full
office.
disclosure.
Even though it's a joint office, it is a town office. They're respectful and do communicate with the village board and mayor, but ultimately it is a town office.
Who could be a host? What is the host what constitutes being a host?
hosted?
Yeah, hosted, a person.
You mean who's the host?
Yeah, who could be the host?
Well, we've discussed that. I think I understand your question. You would have to be the owner of the house. You have to live in Lake Placid. You have to register to vote here. Then you can have a house and you could have part of your house rented out. You could rent a room out to someone. That would be hosted.
You have to live here 184 days.
Yeah, important than it's being rented.
And you have to be here.
So it has to be your primary residence, you said.
Yes, and you have to be here.
Basically, you're both in North LA.
Could our child be in the home if we weren't there? Our adult child, 30s, in her 30s. She could.
That's a good
Yeah,
question.
could our daughter be a host?
That's a good question. Who could be a host?
She lives in the town, she's from here, she lives here.
But will she live in the residence that you're
Yeah,
renting?
underneath, yeah, so.
Part of the
Could she
goal
be
of
a
the
host?
hostess thing is so that a local person has a place to live.
She needs a place to live.
Plus,
Yeah.
plus we don't have the problems with the tenants that get out of hand.
Nope.
Because it's supervised. So it's a double win, if you will.
Would she have to be on the deed?
That's a good question. I don't know.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, we kicked it around, like, if there could be a primary person that's a renter, that could be the host, but.
Could it be our caretaker?
No, the caretaker, no, because the caretaker would have to be on property during the rental,
Yeah, have to live there.
would have to live there.
Well, I do think that's something we will have to discuss more and think about is, let's say someone has a family and if somebody is 21 years of age or legal voting right age, can they be considered the person that's on the property?
It's on the list for the attorneys.
Thank you.
But then
Great question.
Yeah.
they'd have to say have the same
Do I take-
residency,
Yes.
so on and so forth.
Right, do I take it you're planning on not being here extended periods of time?
Well, I'm just
I
trying
like your
to
style.
put my
Well,
ducks in a row.
Our daughter needs a place to live.
Yeah.
We love her to be there. Well, and then just have her stay there.
Well, and to be honest with you, having families stay here is at the root of all of this, so.
Exactly.
But
Wayne,
thank you for that question. Wayne, before I lose your arm.
No, but perfect segue. I was going to ask if your definition of change and ownership is the same as town's thinking, because they have said that ownership is defined, change in ownership is defined as any change, including such things as changing into the name of a trust or different members in an LLC, for example. And when you really come down to it, are you defining ownership of who's on the tax map as of the day you come out of moratorium? And this is, I mean, I understand. We all know where we want to go. But when you write a law, it's very specific, and if you don't nail down all the edges, somebody's going to find a way
Way to
around
turn
it.
it over, yeah.
I mean, like the existing law, any change in the LLC constitutes a change.
I understand. I'm asking, is that where you're
That's where
going?
that's.
And are you also saying the name on the deed or how it's registered on the real property tax?
Yeah, anytime there's any change, that's when the grandfathering goes away.
If I could throw it out, I mean, we're looking at if a husband and wife own it and they pass it on to their children, that changes it. It's no longer a vacation rental permit. If they try to put it into a trust, that, in my opinion, is change of ownership. So I think the answer to that is yes, but.
What if they divorce or a spouse dies? I mean, not that I'm gonna knock on my husband.
I saw the.
I'm just curious with the question line of questions.
Asking for a friend. She knows my name.
Well, I think part of that too are both of your names on the deed, We're
Yeah.
getting down to splitting hairs. I would think if one person left and the other one stayed there, it would probably allow it, but that's another good question.
Excuse me, I may take that a step further. I don't mean to suggest that this is out there, but it's entirely possible that somebody's house is in one of the married spouse's name. They never thought about having to have both names or a family trust or whatever. I'm not trying to make this complicated, I'm just saying.
Some spouse is gonna get treated very well, I think.
But already, I brought it up a couple weeks ago, we have this STR board that's under work, and maybe they can deal with things like that.
Sure. The things you don't think of,
Yeah.
right? Good idea. Yes.
Are hosted and unhosted gonna be in, like, combined for that 240? Or for the cap?
That's what the board seems to be heading toward, yes.
Okay.
Do you have an opinion? We'd love to hear it.
Well, as someone who grew up here, went to high school here, and now is back working and volunteering here, there is literally no place to live or rent. I'm living with my parents because it's the only place. And I agree with having, like, for the hosted, I think that shouldn't, it doesn't necessarily need to be included in the cap, because if somebody's living here as a primary residence, that's the goal. If they want to rent like their garage or their basement, fine, but they are living there full time. For unhosted, like, that's what's taking away from our community, like me wanting to come back and live here.
I agree with you 100%. Like I said, my goal here is to get residents back here, and I think when you look at the price of homes, that's a way you might be able to do it, is to be able to rent out part of your house and pay off the mortgage. I think a part will probably come down to if we can split up the cap, but that's a question we're gonna have to ask our legal, but I'm with you 100%.
Can I double dip?
Sure.
Earlier, you were describing an owner, operator on site, and if it was a detached garage or an apartment above it, that's fine. As long as it's on the same property.
Exactly.
Right. So again, we're talking tax maps. So if someone had an adjacent piece of property.
We guess we're back to the review board again.
No, but I mean, it is a separate parcel, that would not be allowed.
That has come up, that has been splitting here. Have we actually had any of those cases? And I guess I could go to that STR board to make that decision, the review board.
I don't know if we've had.
Because obviously the intent isn't to penalize someone because they happen to have two parcels of land. The intent is so that you have someone there to curb any problems that come up before they happen and police it.
And we did get an email from somebody, they're on the same street, they're just a few doors down. They've been there for years. I mean, we'd be ashamed to take that away. They've been good neighbors.
I can see that 50-50. I like the idea it's a way for someone to live here, but it does take a house away, but I want to hear the public's opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't know if affordable housing is the solution to everything. And what I was thinking is, what about an affordable wage? Where the individual, this nice girl back here, can work and
You
can
think our
have
board
an
can
affordable.
legislate that? I'd like to know how, but that's the free market. I mean,
Well, that's something maybe we can discuss.
Our son had
together.
his baby here right in the hospital. He had to move away. He couldn't stay here. My daughter did just come back, but she has to stay here, and she's getting a professional job, but still.
well, that was part of what we came up with as a board when we started doing this is, let's just take a hypothetical, and I hope this doesn't get misquoted, but let's say you just stop everybody from having any vacation rentals. Would it bring the price of a home down so that your daughter could afford a house? And we all came up with the answer, no. So now we had to get more creative. And I do think there are, like when you listen to the hospital, there are doctors that want to come here and they won't come because they can't find a house. And I do think at some point, if we can start really limiting the vacation rentals, at least the doctors and the higher priced people can come. And if maybe some of the other people that can't can get a little creative and get a place where they basement. There's one on Hillcrest now that has a house with apartments underneath, right beside you, right? Four. I mean, there's one where someone could live on the property and buy a house and live here.
I still think it's all about businesses. As you being our representatives, you need to bring business into town. That's how we keep the young kids here. They have no reason to stay.
Well, it's hard for the younger generation. I mean, we're looking at a total economy here. Shouldn't we be looking at like bringing in some sort of maybe manufacturing facility? We used to have the Cell Center, and that's been gone.
That was at the good graces of the Jones family, and they stopped funding it.
But we just read some article from New York Times in 1972. Same story.
Yeah.
Affordable housing. We wanted to come up here 1983. Again, we couldn't afford a home back in 1983 as two professionals. So this problem has always been here. It's not a new problem.
This problem is always, I graduated in 76, 7 maybe, 77. Yeah. Anyway, out of my 90 kids graduated from the high school, I mean, I can count on one hand how many people are here now of my graduating class. They all had to leave.
Yeah.
Now,
I think that's what we need to
because
do.
we've always had a tourist-based
A
economy.
couple here.
So there's nothing
But
to do.
people move, I mean, that's a national phenomenon that
Yes.
people move around. I mean, I don't think that's unique to Placid.
We don't want anything to keep them here, keep young kids here.
That's a whole larger discussion that I don't know we have any control over, but certainly something for us
Do
to
you see John's
keep in our mind. Let me, as Jason said, would anybody online like,
So we have Kim, Farley, and then Heidi.
You pick somebody.
So Kim's name was up there first.
But can I say one other thing?
just give us 1 second, we'll be back. Sure. We're not going anywhere.
Sent unmute request. So I sent her an unmute request.
Kim, can you hear us?
There we go.
Did you have a question, Kim? Okay, anybody else? Yeah, it doesn't have your name, but whoever's got their hand raised.
That's Heidi.
Heidi, okay, Heidi, hi Heidi.
Heidi Rowland. So I may have misunderstood this, but I just want to double check. But I was concerned when you were talking about not wanting to look at the worst case scenarios that might happen, because I think that's what got us here in the first place. But I'm just going to go back to your corridor and Main Street when you were looking at caps or no caps. And one of the reference was the Wanda building or the Delaval building, which is apparently up for sale. So the Wanda building, I don't know what they have as in terms of owner, but that could most certainly become short-term rentals based on a price point, which could be very desirable if that's allowed. But what the concern would be is that that would displace local housing. And the same thing could happen with the Delaval. However, that could be developed in probably whatever way. But I think that we would be really, it would not be smart to think that we could guess and speculate how that kind of thing would be. I think the determination would be you decide on a cap of how many rentals you want allowed based on how many you want allowed and how many you want to reserve for a local housing population. So I think you're looking at both of those, and don't wait for a market to dictate, because at one time it was said, well, nobody would be renting in some of these residential or patch lanes, say. That's the town, not the village. But who would rent there? That's not on the lake and it's not in the village and it doesn't have a mountain view. Well, in fact, that is where people want to rent. So don't try not to let yourself say, we're not going to look at all the worst case scenarios, because I think you do have to. And I also think that you do have to just decide on a cap that is going to allow for local housing as well. I think that's it, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
So Mr. Farley, I sent you an unmute request?
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. So I'm on Parkside Drive South, I think we're calling it, where it's residentially zoned. And, what's happened over time, whether I like it or not, it's really become the village center or a pedestrian street. We've had 2 hotels built within the last 10 years there. You guys are up there every day. You see the cars. Everyone's there that's parked on the street. They're at the beach. They're at the pub. It's changed. But that shouldn't be at the expense of the people who have bought homes there. So as far as the zoning goes, I think that, at least in Parkside South's position, you got to look at that. And it's become surrounded by, the Placid Club and condos. They can do whatever they want. So I'm just asking you to keep an open mind on that. And I think it's important we consider the people in town who, you know, cleaners, electricians, plumbers, all of them are built into what's happening. So I just don't want that to be lost in this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
There we have K.
KS.
Yeah, hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
So my name is Chris Sandor. My property is in the village on Essex Street. I've been coming to Lake Placid for 10 years, and I've been a neighbor, taxpayer, and property owner for about 4 of those. I've had beers around the fire pit with my neighbors, and we've gone on boat rides, and so I'm not some remote, distant, removed person. And we try to stay up there about 3 months a year, and we did so successfully. We were up there in 2019, 2020, and got pretty close last year. A little bit tougher this year because we got a 20-month-old who's been terrorizing the house. But anyway, I'm not a business owner. I don't consider that I'm running a business in town. I actually don't make money at the end of the year on my STR. I think most STRs, that's true. I actually talked to somebody last week who puts about 15, 20K into their home each year. And that's partially because of the 90 days. I don't host parties. I only host families, and people like my house because they can come with an extended family like grandparents, and we're only 7-minute walk to the village. So I do want to say I appreciate the time and effort that's going into this. It's very challenging. It's very complicated. And, I've been listening in on the meetings, and there's just so many moving parts. I just wanted to make one real point here is that I've heard there are concerns, whether it's people sitting around the fire pit making noise, but they always seem to be pretty isolated, and they're isolated to, let's say, a specific property and maybe for a specific time. I might have missed it, but I haven't heard a lot of data that is talking about this being a widespread issue. I've heard reactions to this from, people on the board, and sometimes the reaction is, well, let's implement broad legislation to this question. It literally came up at the beginning regarding fire pits. If somebody's making noise, let's ban fire pits. So I personally work hard to make sure my guests are never an issue. I solve every problem as it pops up. My lights cut out at 9 o'clock. I had the electrician install that. And so everybody knows to go inside. So I just want to point out that data, I think, is important when we're talking about making decisions that literally will impact millions of dollars that go directly to local small businesses. I'm spending about 30 grand a year on housekeepers, property maintenance, repairmen. And that's, you take that times that by the 200 properties or even the 80 that are in the core village. So there's millions, and that goes directly to the small business owners. It's not some nebulous thing. So I'm just asking that the board really think about where's the data before we start making broad stroke legislation. And one last point is just on the hosted, unhosted thing. In order for this to be, in order for that to really work, it has to be true that all of those homes or all of the people that do come up and rent private homes like mine, they would instead be okay renting a hosted home. VRBO, in fact, doesn't allow you to rent a partial home. Yes, you can maybe rent an apartment over a garage, but in my case, if you have more than one small child, we live with our in-laws. I live with my in-laws here. They come up with us when we go to Lake Placid. We can't rent a 1-bedroom apartment over a garage. So I get it. I understand the logic, but you also have to think when you take away these unhosted rentals, there's an assumption that all of those people that were staying there and contributing to the economy, they're going to then all of a sudden start renting hosted properties. I just don't know if that's true. If it is true, then it would be great to see the data before some legislation is put in place.
I think the answer to what you're saying is we do want people like you to come up and rent from unhosted, but we want them to be on the Main Street corridor where they're not in residential neighborhoods. That's our long-term goal.
Right. I understand that might be the long-term goal. I don't know if that's possible now because the inventory just isn't there if you just shut off a number of properties in the core area of the village. I also would say I get it that there's a request that that the rentals be moved to the main street. But I would say in my case, how am I impacting, what problem am I creating? I'm not a nuisance to my neighbors. My home is, it's, it's not, for somebody that, sorry, my home is, it's not super expensive, but, you know, it's a vacation home. If somebody buys it, it's likely going to be a vacation owner. So, and I don't have like a basement that I can rent. So it's not a solution to the short-term housing. I'm just wondering, in my case, what problem am I causing that requires broad legislation?
The goal here is, as you may have heard from the audience, is to get people that live here, send their children to school, work in the area, volunteer for the ambulance, maybe become volunteer firemen, work for the village. We'd love to have you move here, but it sounds like that's not in your program, but that's the answer. Nothing we have against you, and we are not planning on pushing you out. But at some point in the future where it changes ownership, where you decide to sell, there wouldn't be a vacation rental back in there. It would go to someone that wants to live here or have a second home.
Right. So I understand that. Whether it's if it's a second home, that doesn't solve the housing issue. Anyway, I don't want to dominate the airtime here, but whether my house is a second home or a vacation home or an STR, that has no impact on somebody who's going to want to move into town and is looking for that affordable housing.
Well, and part of the problem you have with someone, let's say you mentioned the second homeowner, they don't come to Lake Placid and use their home for 4 months and every weekend or every night have a party because it's their one time of the year to get away. That is more the case with a vacation rental, and it sounds like you're a very good neighbor, but that's not all the case with everybody.
So I guess my question there is, then I would love to know how often that's actually happening.
Well, that's up to us now to figure out how we can enforce that.
Right. Well, I guess we're talking about two different things. My question is just, where's the data that says these parties are happening? Is it complaints to the STR line? Is it complaints to the police department? Is it phone calls to the STR line? I haven't heard there being any data around, hey, there's this many parties happening. I hear the word parties being raised again and again, but I've never had a party at my home. I've never seen a party as I've been walking around town. And so I just want to make sure that we're solving a problem that actually we know exists in a way that requires broad legislation.
Trust me, if you're on the village board and you're walking Main Street or you're going out to dinner or you're going to the supermarket, you hear from the people that live here, and that's where you get your information from. And that's a good, valid source.
And have you addressed those specific concerns with those specific STR owners?
We're doing our best. I mean, unfortunately, a few can ruin it for all, but it sounds like with where we're going, none of this applies to you and you won't have a problem.
So just to go back to that, so this idea of a few can ruin it for all, is that kind of what's happening here? That there's a few homes that potentially haven't been managed well by the STR owners, and the response is broad-based legislation?
We're just trying to make people good neighbors. And I think the points, if you heard us talking earlier, it's one step towards making everyone more compliant. I think before we had to have a joint village and town meeting, we had to have a joint consensus. There are a lot of things that we had to do just to have a vacation rental policy put in place. The town doesn't have the same problems the village has. The town has bigger properties. They're spread out. The village has a different problem, and we're going to have different laws.
Mayor, I think maybe what he is, correct me if I'm wrong, you're thinking of two different, one is a nuisance issue. And the last STR law, I would say, did a fairly decent job, not perfect, of toning down the nuisance component. But I think both boards are looking at a vision of what our community is going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, much like every other resort community, Ridge, so on and so forth. And this is the direction by communicating with the public and with board to kind of develop a sort of a vision or some sort of guardrails to what the community will look like 10, 15 years in the future. Am I correct?
So what would be the difference between a short-term rental nuisance, somebody having a party and they're calling up, and then you have some kids or whatever, a party at a motel. I mean, what's the difference?
Well, trust me, at a motel, being a motel owner, you shut that party down as fast as you can. And quite often, I shut it down before they even book their room.
Okay, now what about a house? What about
You just
another
said
house?
the difference between a motel.
How would you even know that those complaints are even valid?
What's that?
How would you even know that the complaints for the short-term rentals, which are like,
Yeah, because
I have a
you can
neighbor
call
next door,
anonymously, yeah.
and he or she's not happy with the fact that I have an STR, right? And they're calling your hotline, making complaints, calling police, and they're potentially fictitious. What process does the village board have in place to validate that those complaints?
That would be the STR review board.
Or the code enforcement officer.
Well, that would be first, but I mean, that would fall down.
So there's a code enforcement officer there, and we're gonna increase the ability to kind of identify data, code, and have more sort of database decisions, but Mike Orticelli will look at the complaint and then go investigate. So it's not just flippantly, oh, it's complaint, we're gonna take it at face value. And for your comment, what's the difference between a hotel and a short-term rental is that the owner would be there, but then the short-term rental, the neighbors would experience a party every single weekend
Only
for the
90,
whole entire year.
potentially 99.
Only 99, but I'm just like, oh, that's.
Well, I don't mean it that way.
If it was 100 nights, that would be out of
I didn't
control.
mean it that way, of course.
But the code enforcement guy was here this morning. He seemed to be very aware of the fact that a lot of the complaints are just illegitimate. So.
I don't want to say a lot. He said he is well aware of illegitimate complaints and will investigate it.
I had the same concern, and he, listening to him, I don't have that concern now.
Your data points, even on previous reports that you guys illustrated, two homes or something equated to 40 complaints out of the 115 that you stated that were complaints from STRs. But I don't think what you're not taking into account is the fact that the public has become so apathetic that, and then without sort of the beefing, let me finish, without beefing up the compliance, let me finish, beefing up the compliance component of it, not much gets done. So we're in the process of correcting that sort of situation. There's no data points, those are just simply just based on assumptions, right? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the only data that I've seen so far, and we discussed data, was in the presentation, the 115 complaints that was just referenced, 40 of them on 2 houses. And one of them, as I understand from the compliance officer, no longer has a permit. I think that's great. I don't want parties at my house. That's a 3-day minimum. Discourages parties. You know, it's a kind of an expensive party. You're gonna have a party for one night. So, and I don't want bad renters. The folks who jumped into my hot tub and cracked it are not coming back, and they're also not getting great reviews on Airbnb or VRBO. There is an ability to give us feedback as STR owners. We don't want bad people in our houses. I mean, most of these houses that I see online are junkers. They look pretty good inside, ours does. So we're not I think we're a little bit at odds. There's definitely a tension. Look, if you're a resident, I can understand the point of view perfectly, okay? But on the same token, as an STR owner, I want the town to work on compliance and to get me feedback. I've gotten one call from my caretaker about noise at my property in 22 years, and you know what? It was a house, two houses down, that was running apart. So if there's some apathetic, well, I'm not apathetic. I'm now staying up here in the last 3 years. I'm not apathetic about the loud muffler on my neighbor across the street's car and the fact that she beeps the horn 6 times at 6:30 in the morning to back out of her driveway. But that's a neighbor, okay? I'm not apathetic. I wasn't apathetic about the long-term rental across the street from me that had boom boxes, noise, and the police there every other day. You probably all know where it is. It's right on Marcy, and it was on Marcy and Hillcrest. So we're not apathetic about those things. If we live here, we understand a disturbance. It needs to be acted on by the town. We've talked about compliance a whole lot. There is compliance activities in place, but if we're not getting feedback, I think as an STR owner, I wonder what is the problem, as Chris did earlier. What is the problem? I'm not hearing the complaints. If there were 2 houses with 40 complaints, they need to be nailed down. Those people, I'm not sure where they are, or why anybody would want people in their houses that often that are causing all kinds of problems. It's as simple as that. I mean, you need to give us feedback. I think the town can do a better job, okay? Yeah, and I'm tagging you with that. They can do a better job of keeping us STR owners in line. When we rented our house through Merrill Thomas for 7 years, before Airbnb and VRBO came in to play, the rental manager for Merrill Thomas was Margie Papier. If something went on in our house that was untoward, Margie was on the phone with us. She was a tough manager, and she told us what was going on and what we needed to do about those people. We did it, okay, in every instance. The town needs to be doing that now because now we have Airbnb and VRBO, and we really don't have control of it. I have a caretaker, and my ad, I tell folks that you may come by to check the hot tub while you're there. Kind of discourages people from, planning to act out. But I think the town could do a better job of giving us feedback. Because I want an Airbnb person or a VRBO person who comes in and is potentially going to damage or abuse my house. I want them to get a bad review every single time. They won't get rented. They won't get rentals. It's as simple as that.
Enforcement is number one on our list. As I say, halfway through this process, we realized it had to be number one, and that's a little bit what you're talking about. But I have written down what you said, once you get that enforcement feedback to the owner.
Yeah, Mary, those two.
Great, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, my mic wasn't working before. My name is Kim. So I guess I'm understanding there are two big issues. One is the nuisance and one is affordable housing. Nuisance is something that the town can control with enforcing compliance. And affordable housing, somewhat, but I guess my question is, the impact of affordable housing due to SDR is an issue nationwide in all the popular places. But how does taking the STRs away from some of these large homes affect affordable housing in our towns? You have 7 9-bedroom homes that cost north of 700,000. How is taking away the STR permits going to increase affordable housing in the towns?
Well, so far we haven't talked about taking away permits. We've talked about them grandfathering or not being grandfathered.
Yes, but you're talking about a sunset clause, right?
No.
So eventually is the goal to do away with all STR permits. You have some elderly owners who are in their 70s, so now you can't change the membership of the LLC or the family ownership structure. So then that means in 5 years, for some of those houses, the STRs will go away. Right? For a younger person, you have a longer term, but for the older owners, so is the goal of the town, is the goal of the village to do away with all STR permits?
No, just in the residential neighborhoods, yes, through attrition.
Well, that's not even, you can have a hosted.
Right.
So
Yes,
there's no, ideally,
Unhosted.
the way, I have a difference of opinion, but the way this current board, and as I understand it, eventually want to do away with unhosted short-term rentals in village residential. That is to be as specific as possible. If you have an STR permit now, you will have one moving forward. And if, I understand there's going to be pain at the end, if like you're 70 and you want to sell your investment in order to fund sort of your retirement or so on and so forth, that I think if you buy a house in Lake Placid, you will still gain value. However, there may potentially be a hit, but that's speculation, I guess.
So are we looking at being grandfathered in, or are we looking, because I heard you mention grandfather a couple times, and I heard you say through attrition.
Right, grandfather.
How does this factor in?
Which would mean that
our movement that
at some point, if you sell the house to your daughter, the vacation rental permit would go away. Does that explain?
Well, okay, we're an STR now.
Right, you have an STR permit.
Right. We have a permit, so.
I'm assuming it's an unhosted STR permit,
right.
correct?
So how does that factor in?
Depending on how things go, the current direction of the board is when you sell your house or change ownership of it, that permit would go away.
And you have 90 days per.
Grandfathered in the meantime.
So could we continue the way we are being unhosted and it would be?
90 days.
Okay.
Until you sell the property.
It would be the same.
Exactly.
What it is.
That's correct.
Right now, okay.
At this point, like I said, it's all going to be subject to the town hall meetings and what's been said.
Mhm.
And
There's
the other,
another one.
and then the other part of that too will come down to enforcement on it.
Can we change our unhosted into a hosted?
Yes, at least the direction of the board at this point is you can even open a brand new one. Like if your daughter decided to take over the house and she wanted to rent part of it while she's there, to be able to pay and live here.
How about building a new structure like a garage with a heat apartment?
So far, that's the direction we've gone. Give me one moment, I'll be back. Let me just finish up with the people here.
Angela?
Hi, my name is Angela Holly. I just wanted some clarity on hosted. Is hosted part of the cap?
You're looking to me?
Sure, I don't know if we have an answer to that yet, but I think at this point, we're looking to find out if we can have a cap that would be specific to a Main Street corridor, another cap that would be for hosted. We haven't answered that question.
Okay. And then my other question was, for the Main Street corridor, would new building be part of the cap? Because there are some buildings on Main Street that, if you had a catastrophic thing and you lost your ability of renting long-term or short-term and it needed to be rebuilt, would that be part of the cap?
I don't believe at this point, if you even built a new building on the Main Street or entryway corridor, you would still be able to rent, have an STR.
You would be able to rent 365 days, and the only restriction on.
Unless they go.
Well, right, depending on the
But
cap.
part of the cap of being permitted, if you only allow so many permits.
Yeah.
In theory, right now, but that's only a number, what Mayor Devlin was saying, that's only a number to present to the public and waiting for public input, resident and STR.
Okay.
It's purely tentative, anywhere near legislation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else online?
There's, I saw one here. John?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thanks for hosting this and really appreciate your time. I think KS online was pretty clear, and I think the challenge here is really when you think about it, young folks have been leaving our town for decades. And they haven't been leaving our town because they don't like it. They've been leaving for better opportunities. And the reality is that, how many people work in our town, our village on H-1B visas every year, temporary workers. We're not pulling in workers that are permanent residents. We're backfilling. And the reality is yes, lower income housing, addressing the housing thing, that can help a little bit, but they left for better opportunity. These houses became STRs because people sold them, leaving for other opportunities. And in converting them to STRs, as a few of the folks have highlighted, they've invested a lot of money. They've hired a lot of local people. So the reality is that these STRs have actually been part of your solution in terms of keeping people employed, helping to increase wages. So I'd really encourage, look at enforcement, because the vast majority of STR owners, and I have neighbors that are STR owners, are genuinely concerned about their impact on me and the area and the environment around us. So don't let a few ruin it for everybody. Take it into consideration that these STRs are bringing millions of dollars of work, higher paying jobs, consistent paying jobs into our communities. And the question is how can we increase the opportunity within these communities? Because that's what people leave for. The backfilling on the low income housing side or the more affordable income housing side, that helps, but that's not going to start drawing people back. It's actually the jobs and the opportunity that's going to bring them back.
That was the case in the past, I agree with you. Like I say, I have a connection with a hospital, and I'm hearing they're having a hard time getting doctors to come here because there's nowhere for them to live. And that's part of the problem. And those are the people that come here, live here, send their children to the schools, volunteer. We want to try to bring some of that back, but I appreciate your input.
And I'm a teacher of one of, anecdotally, maybe 10 live in the district. Everywhere, there are some that drive as far away from Peru and outside of Saranac Lake. So we've had an hour away to 40 minutes, half hour, 40 minutes away, just to teach in the district. Yeah.
And in that vein, that's why I think caps make sense, right? You know, I would be equally skeptical of removing caps in the village residential, for example, as I am skeptical on eliminating STRs in village residential or making big changes outside of that, because the externalities in how we're going to affect traffic, spending, demand. I mean, I can sit here and I can guess at, the number of STRs. What is it? It's documented, permitted is north of 500. Undocumented, unpermitted is probably north of 600. Multiply it by 100 room nights times, an average of 4 to 5 people. You get some pretty big numbers. And, how that affects your property managers, HVAC, cleaning, you name it. Those are some big numbers. So I just caution in terms of thinking that we're going to make a change here and magically transform our community from being a tourist destination to something else, because it's very difficult to bring back jobs and opportunity in the standard of living that you've got in this town that's not going to be tourist based. So I think incremental changes and reviewing this on an ongoing basis to see how we're impacting it is really, really important.
Thank you for your input.
Thank
you. I'm sorry.
Anybody else?
Sorry, John. All right. There's one more. Okay, it's 5:02, so do you want to?
Sure, go ahead. If you guys have time. If we can.
Jay Farley, did you?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So another thing I've seen come up a lot is the affordable housing issue and, workforce housing. And in the article in Enterprise today, they said that the maximum amount affordable housing would be like $100,000 a home. When we're talking about these numbers, are we looking at the whole Tri-Lakes region? Are we just looking at like Placid? Because I think it's important we look at something bigger than just the village or the town when we're talking about this. And that's the way it's always been. And what is our goal like at the state and county level to get funding to do this stuff? Because, unfortunately, there's only so much land in the village. There's nowhere to build these big apartment buildings. What we've seen given by generous people in the community, I mean, that's a lot already. But, what are we trying to achieve here?
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
And one more before.
I had a question. Well, first off, I just find it really unfortunate from the fact that STRs here overall have a very bad stigma. Just kind of piggyback on what John and Chris mentioned, there's a lot of positives that need to be factored in and what STRs actually bring in. I myself is a STR owner also, okay? First of all, I find it really upsetting that you guys would consider someone like myself a quote-unquote business. When I purchased a home, I purchased it as a vacation home to bring my kids over here. Right, we come here. We're currently here now on vacation right now. We come here during the winter. Right, we come several times a year. I feel like the board just needs to kind of sidestep for a second and see why folks currently became to have the current homes that they have now, right? And why they do the STRs. I, for instance, kind of do the 90-day vacation rental to cover the expenses of the home. Like Chris and John mentioned, we don't really make much anything off of our house, right? We didn't purchase a home knowing that there's a 90-day cap as a business, right? So those are the kind of things that you guys need to kind of take into consideration.
So is your complaint that we have a 90-day cap?
No, well,
Because right now, nothing else affects you, correct?
no, I
I
mean,
think what he's saying, because I'm saying short-term rentals are a business, and I have one, then it's a business.
well, it's.
You make money on them.
Well, no, I'm not, well, you're making money if you're turning a profit on it, right? I'm not making money turning profit, I'm making money to cover my expenses, to maintain the home. So I could afford to have a second home, okay? That's when I'm actually making the money, okay?
Which brings us back to the other point, is the other people that live here or want to live here say, I can't compete with a guy who's gonna have this as a second home and use that income so that he can outbid me in the market.
Well,
That's the other thing we have to balance.
It's a double-edged sword,
I
right?
agree.
But if you take into account how much it takes per square foot to build a brand new home, $250 a square foot, you take a $2,000 square foot home, that's $500,000 off the bat to build a brand new home. And I'm not even talking about buying a piece of land, right? So you're gonna tell me that a local that's looking for a home could afford that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Some
great.
can, some.
That's great, so then, that's great, but why does it have to be STR homeowners like myself that feel like we need to be penalized when we're hiring local people, okay, from the village to maintain our homes, cleaning, electricity, plumbing, right, maintaining of the homes.
I understand what you're saying, but you're missing the whole point of you don't send your children to school here. Our school enrollment got down to 30 people out of what normally used to be 90. You don't live here, you don't support the local causes. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is get families here, but we understand we have to have a balance, and that's what we're trying to do.
I get that, but if you take that same token, right, I mean, if you take 100, 200 homes that you guys want to eventually eliminate, right, from the STRs.
No, I believe it's only 80.
Or
And we don't
80,
even know those
right?
80, how many are hosted.
So the board truly believes that those 80 homes will fulfill the gap that you guys are seeing in the school, in the workforce that you guys are having here, the issue with the workforce in the district.
The other thing we don't want is people that live in homes right now and leave because they have vacation rentals next to them. And I can name 5 people that have done that since I've been on the board. They're just sick and tired of the language, people urinating in the backyards. That's another issue.
Well,
And I understand when someone comes and rents your place, it's their one time to get away. It's different if you live here or you come up for a month. You don't act the same way as you do for a 2-day weekend.
Well, why should one bad apple ruin it for?
We're not. We're trying is there anything so far we've discussed that penalizes you?
Yeah,
Because I'm not sure where your argument's coming from.
Because there's just an overall bad stigma against short-term rentals, right?
And generally, I think it's been earned. Now, there's a compliance component that we're going to, again, so this may be invasive, but since I'm gonna take some liberties on my last minute. So what I find astounding is that there are a lot of, when we talk about regulation, that a lot of short-term rental owners show up and go, what is going on? I can't believe we're getting names, so on and so forth, and I apologize for being condescending, and that's not my intent. But it seems though that and there are a lot of them who go, I don't make hardly anything, I just barely cover the expenses. And I'm like, why? How is that? We have 231 in the village, and there's another 200 and so on plus. How people are just scraping by just having a short-term rental. Why are they so, for $3,000-$5,000, why are they coming out and storming the Capitol? Why are we the bad guys? I'm like, I don't know, not everybody's making that. I know, Bob, I know you're not making that, but it's just that's what I find astounding is that, would you mind sharing how much you gross with your short-term rental? You don't have to answer that.
Enough to cover my mortgage.
No, but that's a number. I don't wanna.
Enough to cover my mortgage.
That's not a number. That's what I'm talking about. So that's we're being very evasive, we don't make anything. Well, how much do you gross?
Well,
Minus the money. If you're like, oh, wait, if like not everyone does it, and you do it 90 days, 3 months, but I'm just saying on average, as a collective, the short-term rental body feels that.
Jason, if I give you a number, right, you're gonna say, oh my God, I made the money, right?
No, I understand that they're expenses.
Along with that
That's why I
number,
said gross.
do you want to know
not
my
net.
expenses and my expenses for the mortgage?
That's why I
And how
said
much-
gross.
And do you want the breakdown of how much I paid for the local people to maintain the property? Do you want
Then
that?
why do you do it? Why do you do it then?
Sure, yeah.
Because
it
we
must
care
not
4
be
months
that-
out of the year.
I did, I just told you why I did it. I did it so I could cover the expenses,
But
so I
why do
could
you
bring my
continue,
kids here.
why do you continue to have that home?
So that
And,
we can be here 4
Why
months out of
shouldn't
the
I?
year, so we can vacation.
Why shouldn't
but if
I?
you're saying you make no
Just
money on it.
just like you are at liberty to go purchase a home in any other town or city or state, right?
Just a point, on profit. Look, we bought a house
Revenue.
22 years ago, okay? $350,000, $160,000 down, house bought itself. Principal and interest, paid by short-term rentals. So profitability, of course, look, I'm a businessman out, by the way, the state does not define these as businesses. Take that up with the legislature, right?
Yeah, I think that's
The
what.
point is that, of course, there's a rationale for doing it, at least in my case. I was making a good buck and I bought the house, but I bought it with the consideration, by the way, that it was already renting. It had a rental history. I saw the numbers. It went down after I bought it because the owner of the house was the manager of Merrill Thomas's rental agency. So along came VRBO, and that was, we had to be to pay them. So the houses by themselves, that's essentially what happens. But you need the initial capital to get into the investment. It's an investment. It's sort of like it is a diversification as opposed to a 401k. So as far as profitability goes, you don't have to be making a bundle on the house. If you consider paying your mortgage, part of the expense for the house, then you're doing pretty well. I mean, by the way, almost all real estate investments that include a rental component have just that advantage in them.
Sure.
So it's not, I'm not bashful about it. We've been around 600 plus a night on average. We're fine with the 90 days, it gives it, but then again, my house is 22 years, has been owned for 22 years. I won't say whether I have a mortgage or not, but you can guess that I probably don't anymore.
And they're good business.
But I paid it off and a second mortgage as well. So that's the point, okay? So these are definitely good investments. The question is are they so disruptive to our that the town has to do something about them? I think a 90-day limit makes it unattractive. I know there are some owners who have $700,000-800,000 mortgages now, and have bought their house in the last 6 to 8 months from real estates who probably knew what was going on. They need to do their due diligence. I don't know how you make enough money on a house to pay that kind of mortgage, but you may. But I'm not bashful about saying that they're a good investment. They are a good investment. That's why people do it. And by the way,
that's the balance.
we built a lot of hotels in the last 22 years. I don't see any apartment buildings go up.
Yeah, one last question, then we gotta let everyone go home.
I gotta respond to that. They're not a good investment with a 90-day cap. They're just not. You can do the math. It's 90 days times the rent, and that's the gross, and we don't get half of it. Then when you took it gets taxed before you put it in your pocket, and you had your capital, you talk about capital, whether you borrow that capital or you have that capital, if people are doing this to make a profit on that 90-day deal, I think it'd be a bad decision.
But there are people doing that.
Well, I think they're probably making a bad decision. We did it.
And you're not taking funds out of your own pocket in order to rehab your house, correct?
Yeah, we did.
We know I'm saying now. I know the additional investment.
Yeah, we just spent a ton on landscaping.
I mean, it's gonna keep going. It's not gonna, but, so the reason to do it is because we wanna come live here part of the year.
Yeah, we're here 4 months.
So let me tell you another story, okay? I come from a little town called West University, Texas. It's kind of like the village here. It's in a larger town called Houston, Texas, okay? I went to a top 25 university. My wife went to a top 25 university. She went back and got a master's degree. I had half of a master's degree. I served in the armed forces. We had very successful careers. We saved up our money pretty well. We weren't crazy. okay? We cannot afford to live in West University, Texas. This isn't just resort towns, okay? It happens all over the place. Lots in West University, Texas start at $1 million.
And our nieces lived with their parents when they got out of college.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a national challenge.
So, yeah, we have the house because we wanted to come up here. We thought about living up here. One of the reasons we don't live here, it's another Albany problem, okay? We live in Texas. Texas will charge us the full boat of property taxes, whether we're there 1 day a year or 0 days a year. Actually, if it's not our primary residence, our taxes go up because there's a homestead exemption. As soon as we spend 6 months in New York, they want full income taxes. You add those up and that gets ugly real fast, okay? I mean, you're talking about 60, 70% of your income going into tax. That's crazy. So I don't think anybody came to Lake Placid to be mean to Lake Placid and bought a house to ruin the town. Right? I think a lot of people, I'm starting to feel after this morning a little bit like that's kind of what I'm being accused of, okay? We came here because we liked it. We don't want the neighborhoods to be ruined. We found the neighborhoods in Lake Placid to be nicer than the neighborhoods in Saranac Lake, and I think one good reason for that is investment into the Airbnbs. But what you've done here is you're going to redline the village residential, okay? And I've spoken before, and I've told you about our house isn't in a residential area, and we're next to commercial. It's kind of
your neighbor's a bank.
You're kind of a catch-22 on. You kind of get into the catch-22, and I don't see any way out of it, you know. And the conversation goes from affordability. Then when you address affordability, then it becomes quality of life. And when you address quality of life, it goes back to affordability, and that gets a little irritating. We're being grandfathered in, but grandfathering in does not save you. Okay, grandfathering in takes my investment, and only if we manage to stay here long enough to really to enjoy it. Okay. Will it be worth it for us? If we, for some reason, one of us passes away or whatever, and it's, you know, whatever, goes in the hospital or has to go into long-term care or whatever, we would be forced to sell that house. And what you are admitting, what you're saying, your goal is to lower the value. You're trying to take our investment. And that's, you know, it could be okay for us to grandfather it out and if we can stay here long enough. But if the next 3 or 4 years something changes and we have to sell that house, and the next person can't take what we put into it for the purpose of what we put into it, which is the first best use of that property in reality, I think.
Were you unaware of the moratorium when you bought the house?
There wasn't a moratorium when we bought the house.
And we
Were you unaware
we bought before the moratorium.
The last 2.5 years?
What's that?
Were you unaware that we've been working on this for 2.5 years?
We saw the law that was put in front of us when we bought it during COVID. And we saw the law that was put in front of us. Yeah, it was 90 days. We looked at that law and we thought that works for us.
But the only thing I say is, where do we draw the line in the sand? Do we just keep letting everybody keep coming? That's what's happening, and here we are.
No, I'm just responding to some of the rhetoric so that it doesn't affect the total outcome, okay? I told you if you grandfather us in, I'm okay with that, it's not gonna kill me. But don't say it's not taking, it is, it's taking money. I mean, it's the bottom line.
I get it. It's a lot better than us saying no more vacation rentals. That would really hurt everybody.
Right, it hurt a lot of people, not just the people who are.
We're giving you a path forward. And let's face it, it doesn't sound like any of the things we're doing are going to affect you. They're actually going to help you because it's going to get a better reputation for the STRs that are out there. And maybe everyone will get along better. That's our goal.
Yeah, except for the 80 people that are, or the people who are in the actual, going to be banned area, basically, is what it's, you know.
The protected neighborhoods.
The protected neighborhoods. I mean, it's money out of the pocket. So
if you sell the house, correct.
Which eventually everybody sells. We either sell it or we die and our state sells it.
And if you don't, at this point, we don't allow anymore. It kind of gives you a better advantage because there's not as many people.
Absolutely true. Competition will go down.
I don't generate revenue from my house. My value of my house will go down as well. So just letting you know.
I thought you were a renter.
No, I own a house in a street. So my house will actually be valued. So I'm not asking you to do anything that I'm not doing myself.
And that's fine. You're making that choice. I'm being
but I'm saying that's what the people who voted me into office asked me to do.
And it's like,
if you want to vote and you feel it's different, live here, register to vote and vote here.
And I understand. That's great.
Otherwise.
Get out.
No.
But my point is,
have a conversation, but know
Yeah.
that people who vote, that's where the primary.
Please don't misunderstand me. My point is, my point is.
To say, but I think we better end this right now.
Poor mouthing and we're not taking any money is wrong.
We're doing our best to balance it.
Mayor Devlin, is it possible that I could just make one more quick point? I apologize. I promise I'll be brief.
Keep it to 60
So
seconds.
I will take less than that. If there's alignment, which it sounds like, that a permit cap with attrition is a long-term solution, I understand that. In that scenario, my home only becomes part of the solution when the ownership changes hands. I personally am supportive of putting more money into enforcement, and that enforcement can be aggressive. I'm supportive of paying more taxes and higher permit fees to the village if that helps with affordable housing, building apartment buildings, and developing industry that helps keep people local. If that's all true, I would put on the table increasing the cap. I would argue that this has no impact on the housing issue. It does not impact the nuisance issue, especially if you're enforcing it. And it will inject millions of dollars into the local economy. And it does that in the shoulder seasons when the local businesses need it most. So I would suggest, just as an exercise, to calculate what every single 1 day increase of that 90-day cap would add to the local economy. And I am happy to help with that if I can.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. And thanks everyone for the board and all the people that came here and gave opinions. It's not easy. We appreciate your feedback.
Mayor Devlin, could